Hello everyone and welcome to this edition of Talk of the Town. I'm Sean Stackhouse and today we're going to be discussing domestic violence. We'll be discussing some of the issues around the globe as well as here in Arlington. Our guests today are two very informed women from Arlington, Jocelyn St. Cyr and Elaine Shea. Thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So to start, I'll go to you, Jocelyn. Would you just like to give a little bit of your background?
Sure. I have been in Arlington for 10 years, and in this time had the pleasure of serving as one of the directors of the First Step Domestic Violence Program in Arlington, which is a program that has been serving women and now men for 20 years, over 20 years in Arlington. And so I had the pleasure of working alongside women struggling with domestic violence, standing with them in difficult times. And since then, since I've moved on to my own private practice. I work with trauma survivors. I work with domestic violence survivors in private practice counseling, as well as other forms of abuse as well.
For you, Elaine?
Well, I'm pleased to be here. Thank you. I'm always wanting to speak out about domestic violence and what we can do to make it different. I have lived in Arlington all my life and raised 6 children and have been a social worker by training, and I was on the youth service board of the Arlington Youth Consultation Center in 1996 when Joyce Wilson came before the board. She was the domestic violence officer of the police department, and she was concerned about the rise of domestic violence in Arlington and thought that if there was some kind of group that met in Arlington, women would be more apt to go as opposed to Boston and Cambridge. So being a social worker, I said, well, okay, let's give it a try. I think I never had a voice growing up, and so helping women find their voice was important to me. And it was kind of like the field of dreams. You build it and they come. And we started, and maybe we had 2 or 3 people, and next thing you know, we had 5 or 6, and then we had 10. And that group has met every Tuesday night since 1996, with the exception of maybe 4 or 5 nights a year if there's been a snowstorm or someone's sick or we can't possibly do it. But it has been consistently meeting for women who've been in domestic violence situations, some that come to the group were still with their partners, some had separated, but it was so powerful to see the women sitting around the table, and a new woman would come in the group, and the whole group immediately got it. She just had opened her mouth, and they were there. They knew just what she was talking about. And I had been a therapist more individually for many years and never had run a group until the First Step. And I could not get over the power of a group. It blew my socks off. That what they learned from each other and gained in strength from each other was very powerful.
Now, I think domestic violence is a topic that pretty much everybody in Arlington and beyond has heard, but not many people may understand exactly what it means. So to you, Jocelyn, somebody that has been working on this topic specifically in Arlington for 10 years, how would you define domestic violence?
Sure. I think the first thing I would say is I would start with it's a pattern of power and control. And so that's really what differentiates it from any other type of, sort of general argument you have in a relationship. It's this pattern where one partner has power over the other and is exercising control over the other. But the main thing I think I want to say is we tend to think of, when we hear domestic violence, we tend to think of just physical abuse. Right? And I think a lot of the women that we meet with, when we talk about domestic violence, they'll immediately exclude themselves and they'll say, oh, that doesn't count for me because I was never hit. And so I think the thing that's important to know is when we talk about that in this field, we're talking more broadly than just physical abuse. We're talking about emotional abuse. We're talking about when someone is repeatedly, brought down in their sense of who they are. We're talking about financial abuse. I think there's a statistic that says that 99% of people in domestic violence situations have been controlled financially in some way. We're talking about sexual abuse in the context of a relationship where one partner is being made to have sex with the other partner and things like that. And I think the other thing that we don't often, or we should talk about more, is physical intimidation, where one partner is not actually being hit, but they're still having physical force being used to intimidate. So the partner may hit walls or break important objects or drive recklessly on the road, things like that. So we're counting all of that as domestic violence when we talk about that. And I think the thing we often say in our group is, the physical abuse, that's sort of skin deep in a way. It heals in a couple of weeks or months, and that's it. But the emotional abuse, the emotional scars, the psychological abuse, that stuff that takes years to recover from and years to heal from, and it's so much deeper of a hurt. And so that's what we talk about when we talk about domestic violence.
Now, Elaine, when you first went to start this First Step group, were these issues that you were seeing here in Arlington that you thought some weren't even aware were happening?
I think it was really a surprise, and it was a surprise to me. I never really thought much about it happening in Arlington, but it was a major concern. And I don't have this particular statistics, but I do remember at least one year hearing there were like 340 cases of domestic violence in Arlington. That's a lot of cases. That's a lot of people being hurt, and not necessarily physically, but being threatened and intimidated. And then I think the other thing too that often happens is that the tight control, particularly now with phones and such, are checking who they're talking to, where they've been, being able to know where they are.
GPS tracking.
GPS tracking is part of it, and constant call. Where are you? Why aren't you here? What are you doing? Who are you with? What are you seeing that person for? I mean, like 15, 20, 25 calls or text in a day. That kind of stuff, which, just wears you down. So,
do you think that there's this sort of idea that not necessarily Arlington residents have, but anyone that lives in a town thinking that this isn't possible to happen to so many people that even I know?
Absolutely, and I don't know how many years ago it was now, the homicide in Arlington that we had. And what was her name?
Yeah, right.
May. Right, May and her twins.
Yeah.
I think when that homicide happened, I think it was now 3 years ago or so now, a lot of people were thinking, oh my goodness, this was just next door to me. All this time this woman was walking around and she was smiling and walking around and I had no idea.
And her two children were killed too, her twins.
And so I think there's this sense of, Arlington is such a great town, it can't possibly happen here, and I think we think that a lot. But it's happening all over, and part of what perpetuates that is the sense that domestic violence is sort of an internal family problem and not a community public health problem. We tend to think about it as sort of a family issue. And so it creates this sense where people are isolated in their homes dealing with this issue. And so when you look around this town, Arlington, every few homes you look at, there's going to be a domestic violence situation going on in that house. There's definitely this sense that it can't happen here, but it's certainly happening. Not just abuse generally, but also extremely dangerous cases that lead to homicides. They're happening here in Arlington.
Now, when you started the First Step program, Elaine, were you thinking that this would be something that would spread the word around domestic violence to try to inform different residents? Or were you specifically just trying to reach those, at the start, those women that had been affected?
Well, initially it was the women who were affected, and it was through the police department that we got the referrals. Also, the piece of protection. If for instance, we didn't publicize where we met. It was very confidential. And I certainly was not on the TV then, because you're really subject to someone's anger, and I didn't want to put my husband used to worry that I was putting myself in danger. I never felt in danger, but was aware of how important it is to the confidentiality of the grouping. So we didn't go so much public early on. I would say maybe 5 or 6 years ago we did on Town Day, we had a booth as part next to the police station, next to the police department's table. And so we did more promoting of it then, and handed out brochures and all that. So more in, I'd say, last 5, 6 years maybe. Would you say so? Something like that?
Yep, 5, 6, 7 years, yep, absolutely.
What do you think brought that change about? Was it more people realizing that domestic violence was such an issue, or yeah, what do you think, Jocelyn, brought about that change?
I think in part it was just us thinking through how we can get this message out, because we knew how important it was, and we saw the statistics coming in, we saw the cases coming in, and we wanted to make sure people had access to it. And so we started to do some thinking about how to get the message out without jeopardizing our own safety as leaders. And so one of the things that we do, like we're doing right now, is we have the former leader speaking, but not the current leader speaking on camera. So we do things intentionally to make sure that the person who's currently leading the group is safe as possible. So we just did some thinking about that, but I don't think it has necessarily changed or grown an understanding so much as it's our recognition that it needed to be out there. It needed to be a conversation that was discussed out there more. And I think with the homicide that happened a few years ago, we wanted to make sure that this was a conversation we started to have more often, so that wouldn't be repeated in this town.
And do you think that here in Arlington, you've said you've lived here your entire life, how have you seen the conversation from the public progress? Do you think that we're now in a position where those that are affected by domestic violence are more comfortable going to a resource like First Step?
No, I don't think it's ever comfortable. It's a very hard thing to do. And there's a risk involved also. You know, if they do this, if they're found out, if their partner realizes they're seeking help, they're more in danger. So I know it hasn't gotten easier. I don't think at all. And it's something we really have to keep talking about. You know, I think right now, even with all the sexual harassment that's going on, that's been in the news, what the message is that people say, you've got to talk about it. You can't put it under the rug. And the same with, you know, the sexual harassment is not so different than what we're talking about with domestic violence. There's the similar theme of control and intimidation, and women's voices being silent, and we have to change that.
So to look more specifically at Arlington, where it is such a difficult thing to come forward, it can be very uncomfortable and many times even dangerous. How are those affected able to find help?
We have a couple of different ways that we try to get that message out. One is that we have a really great officer, Inspector Rebecca Gallagher at the police department. She is a trained officer specifically in domestic violence. And so our town is unique in that way, in that we do have someone who specifically serves this population. And so whenever she gets a case that comes in from the police, she is quick to give those resources out. But then people don't always feel comfortable going to the police. And so I think it's in conversation. I think it's you know, in outreach. But like Elaine was saying, it's hard for women, for victims, for men who are victims to come out and say anything because they're so isolated. And so it really becomes about, you know, moments of conversation. You know, if there are touch points that you can kind of have this conversation come up, they might hear it and you know. Reach out, but so much about domestic violence is isolation. It's not having access to people and friends and family and resources, and so it's just whatever we can do to kind of get the message out is how people tend to find out.
I think often family members think, oh, it's not their business. You know, they may be aware of something going on, but oh, they shouldn't intrude. And in fact, they really should. They should say, hey, something's not right. What can we do to help? But one of the ways we get the word around is we have these cards. Do you feel safe in your relationship? Take the first step. And they're in the town hall, the ladies' room. They're in some beauty parlors around town. But it has the first step number on the back of it. They're Arlington's First Step Support Group and Helpline, which I can say right now is 781-316-3219. And so that will be a connection to the person who runs the First Step group, and help can be happen for them.
Do you think that there are a lot of women and men, even in Arlington, that still feel like they are unsafe, that they're not able to access a resource like this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
for you, that you're someone that has now stepped away from being the director, you can have a more vocal presence. How would you think would be the best way to go about spreading the word about this very helpful resource?
I think two things come to mind. One is in family conversations. And so one of our priorities for the First Step program in the past few years, and this year included, is more conversations in town. And so we've held a couple of forums in the past few years where we've just been having this conversation. And really the purpose of that is just to spark the conversation so that people can carry it into their homes and have these conversations. And so once we start talking about what domestic violence is and sort of making that clear, it's not just physical abuse, it's other things, then people can start talking about it in their families, and they can start recognizing it when they see it happening to their friends or to their family members. And if people can name it for what it is, then they can get help. And so but one thing is just trying to start and start conversations, just everyday conversations with family and friends. And the other thing that we're doing is trying to engage as many professionals as we can. And so I think it was last year or the year before that we held a training for hair salon professionals and help them recognize it, because they, that seems like a strange population to go for, but they're one of the few people that, you sit down and you're having a one-on-one conversation with someone who's doing your hair. And so we targeted them because we wanted to help them recognize when they might hear it. I'm focusing this year on training therapists. There are a lot of therapists who may not necessarily recognize the difference between a spat and abuse. And so training therapists, so training professionals who clergy and things like that, who are more likely to be able to see it, to be able to recognize it, spot it, and name it so that they can reach out. I think a lot of the people that we work with will say that they've been to the doctor, they've been to the hair salon, they've been to clergy, and no one has said, hey, I think, I'm concerned. I think this is domestic violence. They'll say that they'll go through years of this and no one will mention it. And so to empower professionals and family members to actually be able to speak about it, to be able to name it, I think that's the most important way to kind of get people to reach out.
And once those professionals have gained some skills that you have worked with them on, what does the level of importance become to give a trauma-informed response to some of these victims?
I'm a trauma therapist, so I'm happy to speak on this. It's incredibly important. I think for professionals in particular, if we're not recognizing trauma, or understanding the impact of trauma on how we respond, then we can misinterpret what we're seeing as something else. And so an example of that would be police departments, when they talk to a victim of domestic violence and they change stories each time they ask the question. A police officer can read that as, well, they're lying, right? But we recognize trauma, we recognize that often that impacts our memory, it impacts our trust of someone, and it impacts, how safe we feel about speaking can impact what we say in that moment. And so being able to recognize that we might get changed stories as a result of trauma, for example, that's one thing. Being able to provide a safe space, being able to take sort of the longer path of helping someone heal rather than demanding that things happen immediately is another example of that. So a lot of times that we work with trauma survivors or domestic violence victims, we want them to leave, we want them to get out, we want them to get safe. And we have to recognize that when there's trauma involved, it's not up to us to determine what safety is. And so we have to trust our survivors, trust our victims to best know what's the safest for them. And maybe leaving is not safe, but there may be other ways. So I think it involves having a creative response to recognize that things aren't always as they appear when it comes to trauma, to recognize that we have to have a lot of patience when it comes to working with trauma survivors.
Now, from what I have gathered with First Step, it's a place for those that have been impacted by domestic violence to come together. Now, you had discussed getting out of that relationship, and that can be a very difficult thing to do. So once somebody is able to accept that they are in a difficult situation, what are ways that they could possibly safely end a relationship to find themselves in a better place?
Well, I think they have to talk about it, certainly whether in the group or perhaps with family members or close friends, to have we've talked about having what do we call it, the kit to, if someone's going to, have a safety plan, but an emergency bag at a friend's house maybe. So if they have to leave in a hurry, that they can go to that friend's, or they can have clothing or for their kids, or to be able to get out of the place in a safe way and to have resource. Certainly the police, we are very lucky to have the fine police force that we do. Fred Ryan has been, the chief has been so supportive of domestic violence issues and trying to do everything he can to end that. So we're very lucky, and the police have been trained too. So, and sometimes it's very scary to call the police, but you call 911 and they can be very caring and sympathetic to the cause, for sure.
I think the most important thing, the most important first thing, if possible, is to get out of isolation as quickly as possible. And so it may not be that the victim leaves right away or gets out right away, but I would say, gets out of that bubble where the only person who is setting reality is the partner, right? And so reconnecting, if at all possible, even if it's spotty, to friends and family, connecting to a group, connecting to anyone, even online resources, connecting to anyone who can help reestablish that sense of what's right, what's wrong. So much, when you're in isolation like this with a partner, it can really disorient you. It can really kind of you end up losing yourself, your own guts, your own sense of direction. And so being able to connect to someone else who can say, oh yeah, I think something's wrong here, I think something's off here. I think that's the most important first step. And so that's why we have the first step group, is to have a place where someone is not isolated anymore. And so before even getting out, unless it's obviously an emergency, right now danger, I think the most important thing is to get connected. Mm-hmm.
And I think for the first step group, there would be some women who would connect, and they'd come and it didn't feel right, or they weren't quite ready. There was absolutely no pressure for them to stay. But there were women who would maybe stay for 3 or 4 months, and we had women that stayed 5 or 6 years. And so there was no restrictions, no limit. It was really to meet their needs. And that first connection, so that I wouldn't want anyone to hesitate to call for fear, oh my gosh, then I have to go to this group forever. They don't. It's just whatever they need in the moment, and that connection is critical.
Now, with the resources and the training that have been put into place in Arlington, do you think that Arlington residents are in a better position than maybe other towns in Massachusetts or other places in the United States about how to properly address the issue?
Well, I'm sure we're better off than a lot of places. I mean, a lot of towns do have some resources. There's REACH in Waltham, which is a wonderful agency. I mean, it's a full agency devoted to domestic violence issues. Lincoln Sudbury has a very active group. In Cambridge, I'm trying to think of the name of the Transition House. There's the Elizabeth Stone House in Jamaica Plain. So there are resources in the greater Boston community. I really don't know there are a lot of towns that don't have anything too. So I'm not sure what the rest of the country is like.
Yeah, there are certainly great programs all across the country, and then there are places where there isn't a lot available. And so I think it is important for people, at the very least, to get information. And I think information, in the information age that we're in, there's a lot of information online, there's a lot of information available. And so information, I don't think is lacking, but sometimes the resources to get out and get help is. But yeah, in Arlington and in Massachusetts in general, we do have plenty of great resources around.
Speaking of resources, I think what could be very helpful to someone who thinks, oh my gosh, I don't think this is me, or, but is it? I don't know, I'm not sure. The TED Talks have some terrific speakers, and one is, I would advise anyone who's unsure to listen to Leslie Morgan Steiner is her name, and she wrote a book called Crazy Love, and she gives a TED Talk that is so powerful. This was a Harvard graduate, Wharton Business School, successful woman in New York who was in a terrible relationship for so many years. There's also another one, Pamela Taylor, who talks about creating a safe space for the empowerment of women. There's also men. I listened recently, I heard a talk by Jackson Katz, and what he's saying is it's a men's issue, that men have got to be involved in this whole thing. And he has a very dynamic TED Talk also. So I think if people were exposed to some of this, it might help them. There's also something called One Love, which is formed out of, a mother put this together from her daughter was killed in the University of Virginia a few years before her graduation, some years ago. And that has all kinds of resources. There's also, recently we had a forum in Arlington as part of one of the parent forums. And Malcolm Ashley, whose daughter was killed in Wayland 3 years ago by her boyfriend, was a speaker. And they have the Malcolm, it's called the, oh gosh, I wrote it down, let me just see. Lauren Dunn Ashley Foundation. And they have all kinds of resources. So there's a lot of different ways to really inform oneself about the issues involved.
For many, though, they may have an idea of what they think domestic violence is, but that may not be the case. Jocelyn, what have you found to be the biggest misconception that many Americans or Arlington residents have about the issue?
Again, like I mentioned earlier, that we think it's physical only. And so there's plenty of abuse that goes beyond that. Another misconception that may not be the biggest conception, but it isn't a misconception, is that it's only women who are victims. And so we do have men who are victims. We do have, all genders, all sexes are victims of domestic violence. And so that's another thing. We want to, there are plenty of resources out there for women who are victims, but there also are for men as well who are also victims.
So it says, statistics say 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men will be in some form of an abusive relationship in their lifetime. Those are pretty high statistics. And again, so many women will, or men, whoever, will minimize, oh, he's not hurting me, he's not hitting me, he's not. It's the control. And your gut will tell you every time. And that's what people have to pay attention to. What is their gut saying to them? This is not right. This is not love. This is really control. There's no mutuality here. It's about the power is there and I don't have it. And so we have to find voice and put voice to that.
I assume it's very difficult for someone to admit it to themselves first. Mm-hmm. What impact do peers have on starting that conversation? And when they do see it, how can they best talk to their friend, their family member, to try to put them in the best situation possible?
I think first it's first knowing, recognizing it when they see it. And so a lot of people really do struggle between the difference of a typical, family or relationship argument and abuse and control. And so being able to first get educated, I think, is the most important thing. But then, beyond that, I think peers have all the influence, are the most important, because they're the ones who are most going to see it first. They're the ones who are going to get the first complaint or something, or be able to see some of the signs before professionals and before other people are going to be able to see it. And so, yes, I think getting educated is so important so that you can name it. And then, once you do recognize it, I think the way that I often suggest that people say it is just to lead with their own emotions and say, I'm worried for you, I'm concerned for you, right? I don't know what's going on here, I'm not sure, maybe I'm off, but I'm worried, I think oftentimes when we as friends say something like, I'm worried or I'm concerned, it sort of reignites that own person's gut that said that they were concerned too at some point, right? And I think oftentimes in an abusive relationship or in an abusive situation, your gut will tell you something at first, but then the more and more you are made to ignore your gut, it kind of goes away. and you start losing your own sense of what's right and what's off here. And so when friends are saying, you know, I'm really worried, it sort of reignites that feeling of, oh, I remember being worried at some point about this too. So getting information, learning about it, and leading with your feelings and your emotions. The other resource I wanted to mention actually along those lines is a great book called Why Does He Do That? Inside the Minds of Angry and Controlling Men. And again, this one's gendered, so it's more about male violence against females. But it's really a great resource. It's a great book. It's sort of easy to read, and it talks about what abuse looks like and a lot of the myths around it. Things like, for example, they're doing it because of their bad childhood, right? Or because of their drug use, or because they really love me, or different things that the abusers often come up with to justify their abuse. It kind of breaks those down and says, no, domestic violence is really choice. And so actually that's, to answer your earlier question, I think one of the major misconceptions around domestic violence is that it's because of some other reason. It's because of childhood, it's because of trauma, it's because of something. But really, it's always that person's choice, no matter what. Even if they're getting drunk, even if they were abused as children, it's still their choice. And oftentimes, I think that's what keeps victims stuck, is that they just believe that, oh, if they just got, if they just understood, if I just loved them some more, that would go away. But it's not up to the victim, it's up to the person doing it to stop.
Mm-hmm. That's a very critical piece. It's the choice they make. The other thing I think, as Jocelyn said, you ask, and you express your concern, and then to just listen. And not judge, but just to listen, and then find out resources as you can. But it's being there for them.
Yeah, a lot of times, there's this misconception out there that abusive people are out of control. You spot them on the street because they are clearly monsters, and usually it's actually just the opposite. Usually abusive people are upstanding citizens. They are our leaders, and they're people we trust. They're people who are gregarious. They're wonderful. And so oftentimes when a victim will speak out and say, I'm having a problem here, the person listening, quote unquote listening, will say, oh no, they're so great, what are you talking about, right? They're such great people. They lead the board. They're the CEO of this great, socially conscious agency, all these things. And it's so hard to believe victims because the abusers are so great, right?
Yeah, charming.
So charming, so charming. And so to listen, to really listen and say, okay, I'm gonna put aside my notions of this person just for a moment and really listen to what this victim is saying about this person, and just entertain that maybe they might be right about this. I think that's really critical. Yeah.
And I've gotten a bit obnoxious about this, but I have a campaign to be an upstander. And I had first heard this term, which I loved, at something at the library. They were having a conversation about the book thief. And there was a woman from Poland who had been a child in Nazi Poland, and most of her family were killed. But she and her siblings were saved by upstanders. And I thought, that's what it is. And there's a lot of talk about being a bystander, even an active bystander. But an active bystander stands up and says something and speaks up. And that's what we're doing. I must say, Joe Coro, our selectman, wears an upstander bracelet faithfully. I'm so proud that he does that. But it's that, and have someone say, what the blazes is an upstander? Okay, that's what you need to be. We all have to stand up and speak up against domestic violence.
Jocelyn, you had mentioned that a lot of times those that are the ones behind these horrible acts are people that many in society wouldn't have expected. And I think that's something that we have seen in the past month coming out of Hollywood and New York, of these CEOs, these celebrities that we all know that we would have never guessed. And I'll look to you as, what does that do in society when, what does that say about our leaders when we're not able to hold them accountable. And when they are holding them accountable, many will speak out in favor of them. It's a very difficult position.
Absolutely. And I think that's the entire nature of it, is often the people who are doing the abusing are people who love power. They love control, and so they're going to seek it out, and they're going to seek out these high-powered positions. And so, and they do it in a way that makes them loved. And so I think it is in part that person is going, sort of gaining too much power, but also that they're unchecked, right? And so I think it really is up to us as a community, as a society, to learn to check power, right? To learn to not let someone get so high up, so it's just so drunk with their power that they lose sight of what's right. And so I think it's up to us as a society to begin to change the conversations, to be able to never let someone get so far up in their ladder that they're beyond reproach, that it's impossible for them to do no wrong. So we think of Charlie Rose, who just came out and with all these allegations, and the response from many people is, but he's just so wonderful, he's just so amazing. And so what is it about us as a society that we let someone get to this point where they are just so amazing that they can't possibly do wrong things? So we need to learn to sort of check people in power and begin to look for those things, to be able to make sure that people always are in relationships that seek that out, that check and make sure that they're not abusing their power.
And also, I think culturally, certainly my day, maybe it's changed a little bit more, but to be, a nice girl. You're submissive, you're sweet, you don't speak up. If you speak up, you're considered as not so nice. And for men, that, they have to be tough. You can't be emotional, you can't allow your feelings. And I know certainly Jackson Katz spoke to that, about how we really have to help men to feel, to be, it's okay to have feelings and to cry and to be soft. And it's okay for women to speak up and take care of themselves. And that has to shift. That's such an imbalance, and it has been for too long. So hopefully that will shift.
Yeah, and we talk about changing language. So Jackson Katz mentions that in his TED Talk there, that it's so important that as a society we change language. We do a lot of passive voice and victim blaming in our language. We say things like, the woman who was abused, or abusive relationship, all of these things that are very vague about who is causing the abuse, right? And so we need to learn in our language to switch to this man or this person abused that person, right? To name the person who is doing the thing that is wrong. And really learning to sort of shift responsibility, not on the victims, but on the people who are doing the abusing. So I think there's language, things that we have to change in society. I think we have to change what we're noticing, what we're talking about, all of these things.
Mm-hmm. Now, where it is so important to not cast blame onto the victim and to talk about the abuser as they are, as an abuser and as someone who has committed domestic violence. What are ways that members of society can address those issues and call out abusers while still keeping others safe?
I don't know, I guess you have to pay attention to where you're at and what the situation is. You wouldn't call the person out necessarily when you're all by yourself with that person, far from anyone else. Maybe you get a couple of people together and say, listen, let's approach this and let's name it as it is, so that you have some backup. You don't want to put yourself in a dangerous situation with someone. I think also to begin with how I feel when I'm with you. I feel intimidated. Not you are one son of a gun. Immediately that person's going to be defensive and be angry. But if you name your own feelings with that person, I'm so uncomfortable. I can't believe you care about me and you would treat me this way. I need to have it different. So it comes off a little different in the approach of that, I think.
I think we in social work, we're both social workers. In social work, we often talk about these various levels of society, and we talk about, our individual selves and just what we do and think and believe on our own. We talk about our community, sort of our, who's immediately around us, and then we talk about society at large. And so I think when we're talking about that, we want to address this at all levels of society. And so I think just tackling on one end does some injustice. If we just say, individual people have to do anything without supporting them in the society at large, it creates this imbalance that's just not attainable. So, I think there's some individual, learning and education to be done, but I think also we want to stay connected to groups and community. We want to have community conversations about this, and not sort of, we want to recognize that it's not just a family, sort of hidden family issue, but a public health issue that needs to be talked about in the community. And then also at large in society, changing our language and these kinds of things. And so at all levels, we need to be addressing this so that it can be wiped out rather than perpetuated.
Now, where education is so integral to this, whether it's with adults or even children, at what point do you think it would be important for this to be a discussion in maybe high school classrooms? What's the appropriate time to start this conversation? Is there a point where someone may be too young for this, or should we be talking with elementary schoolers to try to change this culturally?
Absolutely think that's where we should begin. There's no question. And the relationships, I know of a situation of a young woman who in high school is involved in a very dangerous relationship. So it's happening, there's no question about it. And I think we taught, and when you think of the children that are in the schools, the younger kids, they are, if there's 1 in 3 women that is experiencing this, there's a lot of kids who also experience it in their home. And so to not talk about it, I mean, those kids, the parents might say, oh, they weren't around, they didn't know. Kids do not miss a trick. And they know when there's some dangerous situation or things aren't right with mom and dad or whatever. And so to begin to talk early on is really critical. And I think so often the kids can act it out as bullies or, copy the behaviors. And the children are learning, either the girls, you got to keep your mouth shut and you succumb, or the boys, it's okay to be tough and rough and put women down. So I don't think it's ever too early to start talking. And one of the things at this parent forum that we had recently, I just want to point out this, there's a group, this is the daughter of the fellow who spoke that was killed, but they've put together this comic book that is excellent. It describes so well a controlling relationship for its junior high school age. So there are some, I think there's more stuff happening. There's I think it's through Northeastern, and I know the Kraft family has given a lot of money to this mentor position. What do they call it? Mentors Preventing Violence, MPV, I think it is. And it's a very active group in the Lincoln Sudbury schools I know of, and I'm really hoping that we can do more of that in Arlington, because we've got to address it early on.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree. It needs to be elementary school. It needs to be right from the beginning. Even when we're talking about that idea that when a boy hits a girl, we'll say, "Oh, he just really likes you," and we think that that's acceptable. Changing that language to say it's never okay that a boy is hitting you, it doesn't mean that they like you. Mm-hmm. Those kinds of things. Yeah, those are. And
great. Then REACH, this agency in Waltham that is such an excellent place, has put out these cards. They're called Peers Against Violence, and it has like ages 3 to 6 years old. What do you speak about? 7 to 10, up to 18, and one of the first things: eliminate secrets with little ones. Don't try to encourage them not to have secrets, that they can talk about anything, and to have practice. What if somebody said this to you or did this to you? What might you do? So there's ways of approaching even young children about these issues. And
you can get these online, actually. These cards are available online as well.
Online, okay. And through
REACH.
through Reach Peers Against Violence cards. Yeah, great, a good resource.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's important for us to talk about it with young kids. So, 3 to 6 years old, that's really young. That's even before elementary school. And so I think with them, what we're recognizing is that even before children have words to describe what's happening, they still have their gut intuition at that point. They still know when something's wrong. They still know when something's off. And so when we at that age are already telling them, oh, nothing's fine, nothing's wrong, everything's fine, we're teaching kids to ignore their gut already, right? And so from that age, we want to be encouraging children to recognize what they see and be able to name it right away. And then I think as kids get older, we want to be talking about what's available for them and resources as well. And I think what comes to mind is for teens, there is a great organization called Love is Respect. And they have a website online that has a ton of resources for teens out there who are in domestic violence situations. And so we want to encourage teens to get resources and get help as well. We want to encourage teachers to be talking about this with their students and schools to be talking about this. So it's very important right from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good.
Do you think it's important to address this as an issue in society as a whole more than just on a person-to-person basis?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just like I mentioned, different levels of society. We want to be addressing this individually, but also we want to be addressing this as a whole, the language that we use, the things that we do to perpetuate silence and unchecked power and things like that.
Where it seems like this has been an issue that's been going on as long as there have been interpersonal relationships. Do you think there's ever going to be a time that we don't have to have this conversation? Or is it just always trying to have residents be as informed as possible to try and limit issues like this?
Well, you got to keep trying. Can you ever really? I mean, this human nature, people will be angry, will act out of time, but you got to do what you can do. And to not talk about it, to not be an upstander, to not give your piece is not acceptable. We have to just keep trying and do the best we can. And I have seen changes, there's no question. The women that came through the First Step group, so many of them, most of them, I would say. Maybe there were a few that ended up staying with their abuser, but they left and they started a different life for themselves, independent of that abuse. And that's worth all of it.
Yeah, I think there's never a time where we should stop talking about it. I think the moment we stop talking about it, we'll find that it's rearing its head again. And so to continually keep it in the conversation, I think that's important. And to really be constantly holding that, holding healthy relationships as a standard. I think it has to be that we keep talking about it. Otherwise it'll continue. And societies at large, they do tend to, ebb and flow. They tend to kind of swing. And so there are times when societies tend to be safer in various ways, and then they tend to swing back. And so I think overall, we're going to find that at some point, we're always going to need to be talking about it. It's always going to come back. Whenever there is relationships and power, there's going to be abuse of power in relationships. So we have to keep talking about it.
I am encouraged by this whole Me Too thing that's out there, though, that I do think there is a change, and there will be a change in how women find their voice and speak up.
And what we see in that is there's strength in numbers,
yeah.
Right? And so one person speaking out, it's so hard because, the power is sort of an avalanche against them. But then there's strength in numbers. When women speak out in groups, when they speak out as an entire community at large, things happen. And so, and I think that the reason why we talk about the sexual violence is because sexual violence and domestic violence they're close cousins. They're very related, and often we see some of the exact same issues, and often we see sexual violence in the context of relationships. And so, it's a very similar issue. There's tons of overlap, and so what we see happening with sexual violence in the community, in the culture, is what we'd like to see with domestic violence as well.
Yeah. And as you said, it's power and control, and each different aspect. I think this is very appropriate. This is a mantra that we have for the First Step group. A quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. We serve tea at our group meetings because of this. But a woman is like a tea bag. You never know how strong she is until she gets into hot water. And the strength of women is certainly coming forth right now. It's a good thing.
Well, with that, I want to thank both of you so much for joining me this morning and encouraging this conversation to happen with all residents of Arlington and beyond. It's a very important topic that has to be addressed, and I'm glad that I was able to talk with both of you this morning.
Thank you so much for
Thank
having
you.
us.
For Talk of the Town on Arlington Community Media, I'm Sean Stackhouse. We'll see you next time.